Yeah, I can't go on talking about this NASCAR shit. It's just terrible for me. But I think
It is. I think everyone's on the same page that it's one of the worst things about America, and yet the image of all the white drivers pushing the black driver's car in response to this was beautiful. But also, it was beautiful because you didn't have to hear the motors, which is like the worst sound. Like the sonic atmosphere of a NASCAR race is is the worst thing on earth. It's the worst thing I've ever been to. I would rather be at a gun range. I would rather be
What?
listening to the death rattle of you, Sam. Like it's the worst sound. My time that like the thing I like take I went to one
that you'd
NASCAR
rather
race,
listen to me die
in New
than
Hampshire
listen to a
for
NASCAR
damn sure.
driver
And my
drive his car around.
takeaway is like, yes,
That's okay. Listen, cross me up.
it was really bad. I'm sorry. Sorry for that metaphor.
Don't breathe. Just so leave me on this skin. And back up again. So this is Phone Wallet Keys, David Ortiz. Welcome back, everybody. For those of you who did not have the pleasure of joining us last time, let's reintroduce our guest. It's our friend Roger, martial arts expert and former employee of a governmental agency that deals with public health. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. Yes.
He's an Alabaman.
Indeed. Louisiana by birth, Alabama coast by choice and by marriage. I would think it's fair to say.
And what's it like there right now?
I think, not to quote movie titles because I think that's banal, but I definitely think the sum of all fears is a good way to approach what I am seeing. You really haven't lived until you are the only person in a store during a global pandemic who is wearing a mask. And I guess as someone that kind of doesn't give off the vibe of like, hey, that's the guy I'm gonna go talk shit to, right? I'm still, trained in the minutia of observing human behavior, so I'm quite aware of like eyeballs on me at all times, as a liberal traitor to Trump and his cause. And
Do you present as a snowflake though?
Yeah, can I actually just
traitor?
wait? I feel the need to describe you physically. I haven't.
Yeah.
I don't want to like. Roger doesn't look like a liberal snowflake. Roger has 26-inch pythons on his arms and a barbed wire tattoo.
So yeah, I look like
beautiful,
a meathead, right?
He's beautiful and blonde, and he looks a lot more like someone who would be on the bad side of at a Black Lives Matter protest than on the good side.
Yeah, and that's been a phenomenon that I've encountered, especially like in bigger cities where I meet, my wife had a cadre of young feminist yoga students, and when they first met me, some of them were like, Jesus, what the fuck, but after talking with me and spending time in my home, now we are, very close to these younger people, and they recognize that you can't judge all books by their covers. And so like that presentation, that it's just how I look, kind of gives me a little bit of leeway in public. I haven't had anyone actually approach me and start saying something
for wearing
insane.
a mask in Alabama.
Say that
just
again?
so we're clear, this is just I just want everyone who's listening to understand this. What we're talking about right now is if the fact that Roger's toughness is what inoculates him from having to deal with people getting mad at him for wearing a mask. Is that right? Am I understanding this correctly? Like, you
yeah.
think that if like a shrimpy guy like myself was wearing a mask in Alabama, someone would come up to me and be like, "Hey, why do you believe that bullshit?"
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. And I've consciously accentuated behaviors and styles of moving in space that I know project a force field around me. So, I walk fast anyway. You've been around me. And I, have a tendency to like move at sharp angles and, glare people down if they're in my way. And we have to question like what is the deal with that? And this divisive issue about mask and the way that it's magnified and amplified through social media algorithmic funneling. We're at a point now where if you're not already wearing a mask, you're never going to wear a mask, right? And that is, more frightening than anything that I'm personally experiencing, buying groceries. And I think, you should always seek out like the simplest social model to explain a phenomenon, not to, quote unquote, dumb it down, but to reveal the actual problems with the social construct. So in America, we can talk about capitalism and, the 1%, but the social theory that explains America is very simple. It's the divine right of kings. Okay, that is the simplest way to explain what is happening. If you look at the mask issue in regards to Trump, we can talk about social media and the way it's politicized and, disinformation campaigns. But really, the simplest social model to explain the mask issue is religious cults. So religious cults have a tendency to end in mass suicide. So I refuse to wear a mask is we are now in the mass suicide phase of the Trump cult. That is the easiest way to explain the phenomena. And I think that's telling.
Wait, you think that that's the simplest explanation for why people aren't wearing a mask? Because they're attempting to commit mass suicide?
Mass suicides in a religious cult situation are not necessarily the wish for death, but to follow the leader's instruction to the very end. Because no one that commits suicide no one commits suicide in a cult and doesn't think they're going somewhere better when they die, right? So it's they're not seeking death in the way that you and I are using the word. They are following the leader to the promised land, which is...
Oh my God, it's really dark,
Listen,
Roger.
And what is the promised land, Sam? The promised land is getting back to normal. Okay, so they're going to follow that path all the way to the promised land of normalcy, even though it is suicidal behavior. Okay, I want to be very specific.
Brother, I can't believe we have to go through this again, but my idea for improving those shows about cults is having to say at the end why they were wrong. So at the end of the documentary about Hale Bop, like those people, we would have to like just say FYI, the following program, the people thought that the coming of the comet was going to transport them to a spaceship. They were wrong. They're all dead. These people thought this guy was Branch David, who is the harbinger of the apocalypse in the book of Revelations. They were incorrect. They're all dead. That
Yeah,
way
but they didn't fucking commit mass suicide. The fucking government burnt them alive with tear gas. So
true, but they were wrong about Branch David. That's true.
Fine, but it doesn't fucking matter. If you want to be I don't care what you believe. It doesn't really matter as long as I mean, mass suicide's probably bad, and definitely killing them is really bad. I mean, I don't know. History is chock filled with people who are fucking like all juiced up and ready to fucking accept the end times, and it hasn't come yet, at least as far as we know. I mean, I'm not sure if we're living in fucking hell right now or some kind of simulation, but it does sort of seem like this is real life, and that everyone thus far has been wrong about their prophecies of the apocalypse. But I don't know, man. Right now it's looking fucking. I could go. It could go either way.
I will say though that it is a little bit hard for me, right? Because I see the reemergence of the second spike, if you will, coming. And I know in my head that the only people who are really dying of this are the people left most vulnerable by the system, which is like poor people, black people, the elderly who don't have access to enough health care. And yet, I do actually think Roger's right that there is an almost like death cult like pursuit to like going down with this Trump ship that people are that we're sort of seeing play out. And I think part of that is because some people it's hard for me to reconcile, because I think of some of Trump's base as the people who would be most vulnerable and who have like the least amount of access to healthcare. So, like, do you just think they haven't started dying yet?
Well,
Has the deadly part of the pandemic not reached Trump's base yet?
it's reaching them now. I think as we speak. I think the first wave of coronavirus in Trump country is this week basically, or last week, and now like the deaths are going to start coming in. But is this like mass suicide death cult thing? Is it also because they fucking like the polls are coming out and they smell blood in the water and they know that Trump's not going to get reelected? Is it like that?
I would mark that up as definitely a variable in the equation to examine the phenomenon. But, I'm speaking like somewhat seriously, but somewhat tongue-in-cheek about mass suicide and following the leader to the promised land of normalcy. I think it's a good way to understand the situation that makes sense of, the issue of cognitive dissonance. And to continue on with that a little bit, like all cults go through like, a process of evolution where over time the cult begins and then it grows and grows and grows, and it's got a lot of followers. And then when things start to get real crazy, they start to shed followers. And so the people that are left are truly ultimately committed. And, you can kind of use that as an idiom to understand what's happening, referencing blood in the water. Yes, Trump is shedding supporters and voters because of the response to the pandemic, because of the response to the protest, and a million other reasons that are coming to light. And so what you're left with is, it's not even what we were calling Trump's base. It's Trump's core believers. Because remember, they're not Republicans in any meaningful way. Their allegiance is to Trump personally, not to any kind of party. And that's what kind of, leverages the idea of like a cult analysis to the current situation. And I don't see that core group, no matter if their loved ones die or there is no phenomenon in the world that they're going to see and change their mind. Now, I think for a lot of like traditional conservatives, particularly in the South, what it's going to take is the death of a loved one to get them on board with the fact that the pandemic is real and it's not going away. So people will talk about like, well, Roger, you said that we're going to have 250,000 deaths by Christmas from coronavirus. Is that when people are going to start paying attention? The answer is no. The only number that matters is one. Your one, right? So the death has to get personal, unfortunately, before people in certain areas of the country, and particularly people that are, aligned politically in a certain way, start to give a fuck. And that is, I think, absolutely correct, and one of the saddest things I've ever said in public. That is extraordinarily bad.
Have people started to die in Alabama?
Yeah, we're at roughly 1,000 deaths, maybe a little bit less. Speaking of like mass gatherings, to kind of preempt one of your questions that you sent me, Max. When we look at the mass gatherings of protest, there is, cases that emerge from that situation, but not in the way that they were rising in New York City. Similarly, and this is really a good counterexample that shows, I think fairly demonstrably that being outside in sunlight and wearing masks are good things because beaches were closed in Florida and vacation rentals were very much closed and large areas of Florida. All those people came to Alabama. So the Orange Beach, Gulf Shores, Fort Morgan corridor of beachscape during Memorial Day weekend, and that was exactly what 33 days ago, had 700,000 people out there and not a mask in sight, right? So you would expect just a geometric explosion of cases, and that is not what happened. There's been a rise, and there are cases that can be traced to protests. There are cases that can be traced to that amount of people on the beach, but it's not at the level that was seen in New York or other places, and it's not the level that one would expect. So it seems to be the case that being outside is a monumental factor, and mask wearing compounds that even more. So you're still going to get cases, but they're not going to be anything like you would expect. If 700,000 people gathered in the Superdome, right, that would be totally different. So these super spreader events are always almost universally linked to an activity of people being gathered inside of a building, right? So that is, the concern with, going back to megachurch or going to a political rally or going to a bar at 100% capacity.
So what is responsible for the huge spike happening in Texas and Florida and other places like in the South? Is it just like people going to church and going to bars and stuff, as you were saying?
Well,
Also,
I don't know if you spent a lot of time in Florida, but getting their heads around public health messaging is not really their forte. And Florida is a very populous place, and it's very populated with older people. I used to live in Florida in grad school times, and we used to joke around and call it, this is God's waiting room. And the rise in case there is due to population density in certain areas. You've got these. You got to remember, man, it's Florida, so you've got these massive kind of prefabricated tiny cities, village of elderly care where they have their own facilities and own restaurants, and it's kind of like a college campus, but instead of college age people, it's all old people, and they're all interacting and pumping Viagra to get their groove on and so on and so forth. So social distancing is just not happening in those situations, and there are more factors than just people gathering in a place for a finite amount of time that goes into just this unbelievable spike in Florida.
Roger, the North Carolina legislature has made it illegal to wear a mask in public after August 1st.
No way.
Swear to God.
The state
They might change
legislated?
it. They might change it, but right now, as it stands now, it will no longer be legal to wear a mask, August.
No way.
Yep, that's their fuck
Send me
you.
a link on that. That doesn't make sense. Illegal to wear a mask?
Yeah,
We need a fact checker.
how dare you? Roger, do you believe me?
Yes, but I'm still going to confirm it.
Well,
Fuck you
I don't
both.
know. It's one thing like in New York, the marches were so crowded. There was social distancing was not a thing at all, but everyone was wearing masks. It was outside. It was moving around constantly, and there really wasn't a spike that everyone even at the time was like, if there's not a spike after this, then coronavirus is over. That's what we were saying in the streets in New York. And there wasn't a spike, but it didn't mean that coronavirus is over. It just kind of means that coronavirus is happening elsewhere now. But I'm actually confused about it. Like, because does that suggest that we have herd immunity from New York? Or is it really as simple as if you're outside wearing a mask, you're not going to get it?
It is not an issue of herd immunity, especially at the countrywide level. I know that's something that we talk about a lot, herd immunity. But to get to herd immunity in a country the size of the United States would require anywhere between 1 million and 3 million deaths. Otherwise, it's just not happening. And so that's not a really viable public health strategy for immunity.
No, but I'm not even talking about a public health strategy. I'm just trying to figure out why there wasn't a spike in New York or elsewhere in these cities after the protests where there was no social distancing whatsoever.
Given the lack of contact tracing and testing in a blanket style, it is the working theory, and the research seems to suggest this is accurate, that wearing masks and doing your best to stay socially distanced, even if you're outside, is, besides hand washing, the most important non-pharmaceutical interventions that we can engage in at this time. Because otherwise, yeah, you're right. Like, if masks don't work, then you would see just this radical spike in cases in these situations. And again, what is more concerning is large groups of people not wearing masks and also being inside of a building, because all that exhalation is, of course, being recycled through air conditioning systems, and the filters on those machines do not filter for these types of pathogens. So those are the places where these, again, super spreader events are seemingly popping up, not people being outside. I'm not saying no one gets infected if you wear a mask. I'm not saying no one gets infected if you're outside and sunlight's a magic cure, so you should shine it up your butt. That's not what I'm saying. But statistically, it seems to be the case that mask and being outside, and if you can, maintaining social distancing, is highly effective in preventing the spread of coronavirus.
Is there anything else that is highly effective in preventing the spread of coronavirus? Like, what if, if you were in charge of a governmental agency that was tasked with looking after public health, and you had, let's say, a huge new budget because there's been a lot of redistribution and police, the billions of dollars that have been in local police forces has now been freed up because we've defunded them successfully. The protests have been successful. And now you're in charge of a, governmental agency whose responsibility is public health, and you have a huge new budget. What do you do?
Well, you spend billions of dollars on public health messaging and public health education, and just an absolute deluge of advertising in terms of mask wearing, getting the best people from the social media behavioral science wing to just take over. And that is what is not happening now. There's no strategy for teaching people that wearing masks is not a political issue. It is a public health issue. And until you make that dissection, we're not going to get anywhere.
And so you think that as far for the diehard, as you said, like the core supporters of our president, it's probably not going to reach them, but there's still like a lot of other people that are in between that are like not wearing masks right now, but it's just because it hasn't been presented to them in the right way. And all we really need is like the right messaging and the right volume of messaging.
Yeah, because
hold on. But I just read a New York Times article today that said statistics show that people actually trust doctors more than they reveal, they claim to, they cop to based on their politics. So that even Trump's base, the hypothesis goes, in Oklahoma might have actually, without saying so, stayed away because um uh
They were afraid of
because
coronavirus?
they were afraid of coronavirus.
No, they stayed away because the K-pop and the TikTok fucking Gen Ys or whatever, Gen Zs got all the tickets.
No. But I guess like I mean what you're saying here, Roger, I think can be illustrated by AMC theaters at first saying we are not going to take a position on mask wearing in our theaters because we don't want to get involved in politics when we reopen.
Wow, is that true?
That was their initial statement. And then everyone freaked the fuck out and they fixed it. They changed the statement. But this seems to be an illustration of what you're saying. Is that right, Roger?
Yeah, definitely. So, pressure works, and persuasion is a matter of pure repetition in these situations. Okay. So this is not, Aristotle talked about this. This isn't like some kind of new insight. You flood information channels and communication channels with proper public health messaging, and you do battle, in the information sphere against the words of the president, and then the words of what I've been calling lately the plandemic people. So the people that are not necessarily Trump supporters, but statistically probably are, but they are, very much embedded, and they're an offshoot of the anti-vax movement that once the vaccine for coronavirus, assuming there is one, rolls out, they're going to be reincorporated into the anti-vax movement. But these are the anti-mask people that are, offshoots of that original anti-vax movement. And there's absolutely, they are lost. So you cannot persuade them. The disinformation campaign and the misinformation campaign from those groups of people has been very aggressive. So aggressive that I've had to really have a sit down with family members and say, they'll ask questions like, I watched this video on YouTube and this lady says that the flu vaccine causes coronavirus. Like, it seemed, and the style of this 30-minute documentary seems very legit. It has all the kind of tropes of like a serious documentary, and they're interviewing scientists supposedly, and it looks and sounds legitimate, and it is the kind of talk that you would hear at the deepest levels of psychiatric hospitals. Just total insanity. The idea that
who is making these videos, Roger? And
are these actually just crazy people?
No, these
that
are
are making the videos. And also, could you give us a brief sample about how some of these conversations go with your family members?
Sure,
like the things that you have
I'll
to
answer
say.
both questions. So these are professionally made videos. This isn't some guy with an iPhone. The documentary in question is about a scientist named Judy Mikovits. So for years now, she's been going on about how vaccines cause cancer, they cause autism, and she makes claims that she is harassed by the deep state, and the whole operation is engineered by Anthony Fauci. And like I said, she believes the flu vaccine causes COVID, and most dangerously, she is arguing in this documentary that mask wearing makes you sick because you're, rebreathing the toxins that you exhale out of your lungs. And like I said last time, this is so dangerous. It's another example of, during a crisis, people's ability to critically evaluate information decreases while their psychological desire for explanations, any fucking explanation, increases. So critical thinking goes down, desire for an answer goes up. And speaking to, family members, I have to explain, like, look, this woman who at one point 20 years ago was a legitimate scientist became a conspiracy theorist. And she was not an epidemiologist or a virologist, but a chemist. And she's been involved with this movement for years now. And there is no scientific credibility to any of this. But, I don't use social media. And I've been off social media for almost a decade for reasons that if you have been listening to me talk through these podcasts, you can probably figure out. So, this older family member is on Facebook, someone posts it to a news feed, they go to YouTube and watch it, and you see the language. If you just conduct like basic linguistic analysis, you see the language of the documentary when, for example, the speakers down in Florida at the city council meeting are like, mask actually caused the illness, and this is a fake pandemic. This is a plandemic. All the language used in these disinformation conspiracy theory videos is being parroted out of these people's mouths. So you wonder where they're getting all this. They're getting it from Facebook and YouTube, and this type of disinformation is not being rectified by serious disinformation countermeasures. And that, if I had all the money, yeah, that would be phase 2. So educate and then just wage absolute total warfare against disinformation. Because unless you do both, you're getting nowhere. Because you're fighting a message and putting out a message at the same time, and the message that you're fighting is louder than yours. It's not a winning communication strategy during a crisis.
Huh. I mean, I guess we also need some more hospitals too, maybe.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Definitely.
How do you wage war against misinformation? You just like take it off YouTube or something?
No, you can't. You can't ever do that. That's
Because it's freedom of speech.
I don't. As an operator, I don't really think about that so much as if you take things away, it increases the power of the conspiracy. So
right.
I've always advocated for total transparency. So, you're running a government organization, you're engaged in direct disinformation countermeasures through a Facebook profile that is tagged to that agency, and you put up a piece of information and the bots and the trolls come after you, and you just let it stand. You answer questions and respond to inquiries, but you don't take things down. I think that's a bad practice, and it shows, it proves the point of the interlocutor that, we're being censored, that, our freedom of speech is being interfered with. That is a poor strategy, and a strategy that was tried in the beginning when the federal government, especially response agencies and scientific agencies, started flirting around with social media back in 2008. That was, of course, a bureaucrat's logic. Well, if we get negative press or negative comments, we got to get rid of them. And that turned out to be a total nightmare. And then kind of my generation comes along and like, no. That's crazy talk. Like, you need to let it all stand and respond to it. And that's one way. And I also think, getting on board with the idea of kind of light levels of shaming people without making them feel like terrible people.
Oh, now you're really talking Max's language. Max, are you okay? Are you shaking? How excited are you right now, Max?
I do think shame is a powerful agent, and I think it's underrated.
Yep, there it is.
I think it's productive. I think there's productive shame and unproductive shame, and I'm in favor of both.
It seems so hard for me to imagine a scenario in which you're persuading anyone of anything on social media. It just seems like this is not the place to go to try and persuade people who are not already of the same general feelings that you're in. So I wonder, like, how effective a strategy, even if it's huge, even if it's mobilized with lots of resources behind it, it's like you're still at the end, like, I don't know, like from a public health standpoint, my experience in social media is that it's so impossible to talk to someone in any way that is effective, and to persuade them of something is just beyond the question. There's no doubt that that's going to that's impossible to pursue.
Right. You are absolutely correct. So let me qualify all that shit I just said. Everything I just said should have happened back in December. So you are right. That war, we lost. It's over. There will be no restoration of public health messaging. We're done. It's kind of like the war on terror is over, and we lost. And the war on coronavirus disinformation is completely over, and we lost. So everything I'm saying.
And also, isn't the social isolation war lost too? We're not doing that anymore. I mean, we're not doing it in London. It doesn't sound like we're really doing it. Like New York is reopening. It seems like people are just sort of like, fuck it. I mean, like, is what you're saying that 1 to 3 million people are going to die of coronavirus before this is all over?
Probably not, because, well, hopefully there'll be a vaccine that will prevent that at some point. And then the measures that we did take, shelter in place, some people are socially distancing. I know I am. That has effect. Even if it's just, 100 million people out of 330 million or 50 million, that still has effects. And that is not the scenario of just like completely everyone at one time is like, fuck it, I'm going back to life. That would lead to the millions of deaths count. You're still going to have 200,000 to 250,000 deaths by the end of the year. That is a mathematical certitude.
Fuck.
And here's an interesting number that I wanted to bring to your attention. Today, and there's no correlation, but I think it's interesting. Today, America has 4.5% of the world's population and 25% of all deaths in the world from coronavirus, which is a precise match for we have 4.5% of the population. Woo! And we have 25% of all prisoners in the world as of today.
You're going there. I love that.
So that's an interesting thing to think about. And
it just means it doesn't mean anything except that our fucking society is sick.
Yes.
And that sickness is all pervasive and it manifests itself in many different forms. It's not that our prison population is responsible for our higher death rate. It's just that our failed society is responsible for both.
Yes. And today, those numbers match perfectly. So remember this day. And the coronavirus deaths are going to go up. And we're going to exceed 25% of the world's deaths in that arena. But as of today, exactly 60 days from the last time we had this conversation, and I listened to that podcast yesterday to make sure I didn't repeat too many things. And it's absolutely horrifying that I was full of piss and vinegar 60 days ago on April 28th when we had 55,000 deaths. And now we have 126,000 deaths. And that was 60 days ago today. And the correlation of these numbers are exactly as you say, Sam. It is indicative that our particular brand of living in the world, our civilization, is failing.
Damn.
Fuck, dude.
So,
I mean, yeah, I guess I just want to add that, like, this society has arguably always been a failure, or at least, like, it's not arguable that the successes that we have offered, that like we as that America has offered the people, has only been offered to a select portion of the people, and I would argue that would render it a failure, certainly measured up against its own standard of all men are created equal. But any kind of fantasies that anyone was still holding on to, that this was not a complete failed society, have been completely eradicated by coronavirus. And just in the first wave, right? Like, there's still more to come, right? Like, Roger, isn't there a second wave coming?
Okay. to answer your question as if I were like just a normal person, the answer is yes. Okay. But the problem here, the terminology of waves became popular in usage during the 1918 to 1920 H1N1 influenza pandemic. However, the language of waves started in the 1892 influenza A pandemic. The problem that if you really want to have the best tools to understand what's going on, waves are a very contentious and controversial term. Okay, waves do not exist. Okay, they have no ontological status. You understand? They are a mathematical fiction for the convenience mainly of people working in public health emergency response. So, for example, you look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Oh, it's at 26,000. The economy's doing good. Okay, you can't use that monocausal explanation. This one number is good to explain something as complex as an entire economy. And as we know from what we've experienced, yes, the stock market's doing fine, but we're in a depression. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be a correlation between the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the fact that 40 million people are unemployed. Waves are not a reflection of viral behavior. The waves that we're talking about right now, that's a reflection of human behavior. So you have the initial outbreak of a disease, no one's paying attention, and a lot of people get it. People get scared, they go home, they get tired of that shit, they go back out. That's not an action of the virus. The waves that we're talking about are a indicator of human actions, right? So this second wave that you're going to get in the fall and winter is not anything to do with the causal mechanism of coronavirus. It's the fact that when it's fucking cold outside, everybody goes inside all the time and nobody's outside anymore. And it's like, well, I'm inside, it's winter, why am I wearing a mask? So that second wave is not action of the virus. That's a human phenomenon. So, for example, it's so unfortunate for so many reasons, but from a pure emergency response point of view, New York City as being kind of the first big mass casualty event is really bad for people's psychology, because what it teaches people, and disasters and crises are very bad teachers, what it teaches people is that, hey, my city doesn't have 1,000 people dying every day. We're doing okay. Because that was New York, and we're not New York. And that is a false supposition. So use the word wave, and yeah, there's a second wave coming, but if you really want to have like a deeper understanding of what is going on here, don't kind of like just think about waves. It's really these series of rolling eruptions. Waves, by the nature of the word, imply a rhythmical nature, peaks and troughs. Pandemics do not have this pattern of any kind, right? So it is more like a rhizomatic organism popping up out of the ground at random spots due to certain facets of human behavior. Instead of just like, well, it was this number on a screen that we call deaths of today, 126,000 is going to have a trough, perhaps, and then rise again. But that's a nationwide number, right? And that's not how viruses work. They don't proceed smoothly through a population, right? Because pandemics do not have that pattern. The wave pattern is what we're doing as human beings, okay?
I guess, but there's kind of no point in talking about the coronavirus absent of the human behavior. I get what you're saying, and it's really interesting that it's like that's not the pattern of a virus, but it is the pattern of human behaviors. And this virus has a relationship with human behaviors that's inseparable. And so the wave terminology, I understand you just laid out very persuasively why it's problematic, but I think that the one thing that I think is helpful about it is it indicates the virus is where it is, at least for me living in the north, this is what it feels like. The virus is where it is right now when everyone, it's actually kind of not that bad in New York. You get your food to go, everyone can eat outside and it's fine. But as you're saying, once the weather gets bad and hanging out outside is no longer an option, like it's at that point that we'll start to see this the so-called second wave. And I like, maybe wave isn't the right terminology, but I am like looking ahead to that time and thinking, what the fuck are we going to do? How are we going to prevent this? Like, how are we going to keep on the downward trend in New York or prevent a spike once the weather gets bad? Is there any like,
Um, Stay home as much as possible and wear a mask.
right? Okay, so and this is my response to you. Like, I'm a bartender and a martial artist and a musician. All three of those things require being in a room with other people, and in some cases, being like kind of intimate, up close and personal with someone else. Am I just gonna cross these three things out of my life and just try and reinvent myself as a podcaster?
But you've also had it.
I've had it, and no one fucking knows anything, but that people are like, yeah, you should be immune for a few months, which is over now. I got it 3 months ago. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be the first credible case of reinfection, but and at a certain point, we probably will start seeing cases of reinfection, and then we can all reevaluate what's going on. But just in general, like in society, Roger, if you were a bar owner, or let's say you had your own dojo. Do you have your own dojo?
No, I teach people on the
No.
beach. Yeah.
Yeah, so like what would you do right now if you had your own dojo? Like in what circumstances is it going to be possible to do jiu-jitsu again safely or do aikido?
I can only answer for myself because we are now entering into something that has never taken place in recorded history where we just gave up on a crisis of this magnitude way too early. And speaking only for myself, and I understand I'm in a highly unique position. I am not going out. I have not had human contact with anyone but my wife since February. So that is what I'm going to continue to do. So I'm not going to jiu-jitsu. I haven't been to a restaurant since 2019 because I'm pretty aware of what's happening with all this back in December. And as far as returning to those kinds of activities, I personally will not be doing that. Now, for people that live in a city and have to interact with other people, you know, is it the case that you should just become a podcaster? Well, the obvious answer is if that's possible, you should do that. But if that's not possible, you should take every single precaution that you can, especially at work. And I don't see a scenario where doing martial arts with other people is a safe bet, because it's just not. And so I've let that part of my life go. I
Wow.
work out at home. I have enough knowledge of yoga and solo drills from jiu-jitsu and aikido and judo and stick work and knife work to keep myself entertained. But changing habits to minimize my interaction with people, which had been zero for me personally.
But Roger, it's not just you're not a martial artist, or you like previously weren't a martial artist for entertainment. It's a path that you're on for whatever reason. Like it's like been a journey of your lifetime where you've dedicated so much of your life to going deep and deeper into this like path of martial arts. And it's not just about like learning how to defend yourself or something like that. It's about like searching for something deeper. And my guess is that that search is itself like, it's like the journey is the journey is the destination or whatever. Like, so how can you give up on that? Like, or how can you keep going with that with like absent other people? Because these martial arts, it's not like kung fu or something where you can do some kata that's like takes years to learn, then but it's all by yourself. Like these are stuff. These are. It's like you can't.
I want to ask another question that's similar to that, because uh, you use the same language that my brother just did in his question earlier, and I think it deserves unpacking. And that is like, you sort of talked about what a give up on to the virus, to the pandemic, on the scale that we're talking about would mean going for society going forward. And I was just hoping that you could play with both of these concepts a little more, because there's definitely people who are not giving up, right, their martial arts practices, and instead giving up to the pandemic. And like that sort of like demand that people are making for normalcy or life, like pretending like the pandemic isn't here. What is that going to mean, do you think? What does that portend going forward? Sort of like not giving up or giving up to the pandemic.
Well, I can answer both quickly. Given Sam's question, is it? You're right, Sam. It's not. It was never entertainment to do martial arts. It's a way of living in the world, and it changes every part of your body, your consciousness, and to put that on pause is extraordinarily distressful for me in particular, and I'm sure lots of people. And that is a weighed decision that I've made that makes me extraordinarily sad. But I think it's, for my situation, the right thing to do. Not just because, I don't want to get sick, but I don't want to get someone out here very sick. And these are not in the realm of like moral judgments. It's all about what you can personally withstand. And it's not about being strong or tough. It's rearranging your consciousness around the current situation in a way that makes life, for right now, bearable. And what makes things bearable is, it's like in the book Fight Club, he talks about when you work yourself to total exhaustion through physical activity, you can feel it at rest. And so the habit that I've engaged in is, I'm not training with other people, but I'm going to work out so long and so hard that I'm absolutely, totally exhausted. And then at 5:30 every day, I take a 45-minute nap. And when I wake up from that nap, I've been playing the same exact song in my headphones since we went into shelter in place back in March here in Alabama. And so it's almost like choosing Groundhog Day. But, in that respect, I have deep levels of interaction with those repetitions. And it doesn't make them boring, because I don't necessarily think that mental interest is just about novelty, but about engaging in something again and again and again. And I've had the opportunity to do that for many months now. And so,
what song?
It's a song called Winter by a ambient electronic artist named Colossus from Poland. And I play it because it has a tone of what I'm feeling, which is a hopeful melancholy, right? So I'm not depressed. I think anyone who's not sad is clearly fucked up. The idea that this is fine is false. I mean, you should be having some things going on in your mind that you need to reflect upon if you are a functional person. To talk about more of your question, maybe a little bit, Max, it's if you have a place like a dojo or a yoga school or some place like that, I've seen people do some very creative things, with Zoom and training in a socially distanced way, especially like Okay, well, we are where we are, so let's work on Ukemi for a year by ourselves, and we'll all be 6 feet away, and we can have discussions of this one thing because martial arts is so broad that you can isolate certain things and reverse engineer motions and just work on that one tiny thing. Because when you don't train martial arts, and you guys know this, you take a break for 6 months, you don't forget the techniques. What goes first is fine motor skills and your sense of timing, right?
Huh.
So as long
Yeah.
as you maintain like a basic level of physical fitness, or in my case, kind of a ridiculous level of physical fitness, just for the sake of resting properly at the end of the day, and you kind of look at motions that you had to accomplish with a partner, a training partner, BC, and then develop drills for those timing and fine motor skill issues that are going to be the first to degrade when you don't do them with a partner over time. So, if you're doing your drills and you're doing your stretching and your yoga, you're going to be able to go back in 6 months or a year to your space, and it's only going to take you a month or two to get back to where you were. Whereas if you're just like, man, fuck it, it's coronavirus time, I'm buying a stationary bike, and that's all I'm going to do for a year, when you return to your practice, you're going to be at a huge lag, and it's going to take you half the time. It's going to take you 6 months to get back to where you were, if not longer.
I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I think it's great advice too, and I think I'm not. I think there probably you can extrapolate from that in some other, like, it's basically about keeping up your chops. I mean, I don't know if you like, if your passion is owning a restaurant, it just seems like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just like this is the time for innovation or something. But basically, you're saying is that there is no way to resume activities that involve human to human contact indoors without it being a huge risk to public health, and therefore like something that you probably shouldn't do. I mean, does it depend on where you are, like a little bit?
Of course, geography is part of public health and personal health. I mean, there's going to be a difference between, doing jujitsu with the 4 people you train with in rural Montana and, going to a place in a city, of course, and weighing those risks and, having honest conversations. I had a training partner, a young man in the neighborhood. His family stays here during the summer, and they were sheltering in place. They had been sheltering in place for a month with no problem, and so were we. And at the end of that 30 days, we had to have a serious conversation like, I will train you, but as soon as you stop sheltering in place or have any interaction with someone who isn't in this house, we cannot train together anymore. So that happened because that young man had to go back to work. He had other things to do. The family generally kind of started to come out of shelter in place, not all at once, but that to me was the point to, I can't train with him anymore. And that's just how it is. And it's not personal, but
Of course.
that's the level that I'm taking this.
Would you train with someone who had a positive test for coronavirus and then had since recovered, like a month later or something?
I think that's reasonable given the data that we understand at this time. I would do that, especially if we both had already had coronavirus and recovered. That seems safe for now. There could be more information about that. I know that there are these, black swan events of reinfection, and that's been true for many different types of diseases. You have a 99% immunity to chickenpox once you get it, but that doesn't mean there aren't cases of people being reinfected, or polio, or pick one. That's always going to be an outlier event. But in terms of like, the statistical roll of the dice, they're in your favor, of course.
Well, I think this has really been great. We're about at an hour. Um, is there any topics that either of you really wanted to cover? I think we should probably close with a quick discussion of the Talladega Noose. Unless there's other things you guys want to cover, is there?
I have like one more thing and then I'll be like truly done. Remember how last time I talked about how the tools and strategies of counterterrorism, public health is routed through that and it unduly affects racial minorities? You remember that?
Of course. How could I forget?
Okay, so I'm going to go back to that just for a second. So,
Please do.
last time we talked about how since 9/11, the public health response is routed through the matrix of counterterrorism strategy and tactics. And because of that, it's going to unduly affect racial minorities. Now, if you look at the counterterrorism surveillance apparatus as an eye that always has to have a focus, you're now entering a time where instead of the counterterrorism apparatus focused on racial minorities specifically, they're going to be focused on protesters who also might be racial minorities or also not. So the surveillance apparatus of Homeland Security is now focused on the protest movement itself, not only in real time by using drones to surveil protest as they are happening, but the planning around the future is also focused on protesters. So look at this equation. There is no scenario where November ends without protest. Okay? Biden wins the popular vote. Trump wins the Electoral College. Protest. Biden wins outright. Trump claims he cheats. Protest. Trump wins by a nominal margin that is an effect of discounting absentee voting. Protest. So it goes like this. The Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville was training for the police. The Black Lives Matter protests, from the point of view of the police, are a training exercise for the protest in November. So we've seen how far they're already going to go. And if they combine forces with the Joint Terrorism Task Force and have full control of the counterterrorism surveillance infrastructure, you're going to have a real problem. And if you think I'm crazy, remember that this exercise has already been conducted in 2018 by the Pentagon. So this is not some like Homeland Security fuckboy shit that I was talking about last time. This is DOD. This is a Pentagon exercise, a war game. And it's already been done, except without the added dimensions of Black Lives Matter and the pandemic. So in 2018, Department of Defense conducted an exercise called Z-Bellion, which is basically the millennials have enough of this shit.
I read about this. Yeah.
Right. And they rebel in a, as you said the other day, Max, in an intifada style rebellion that is both real and virtual. Right. So this game has already been run. And if you think for a second that somebody at DOD is not pulling that 2008 exercise out of the drawer and writing it again with the added variables of Black Lives Matter and the pandemic, you are a crazy person. That is exactly what is happening.
But so what is that all that to say, though? Like that the Department of Defense will be prepared for massive uprisings and they will meet those up. Like, and I'm guessing that the Department of Defense, the military, only has one kind of solution to how to deal with those, and that is to use their military might to thwart it. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
So you're just saying prepare for the inevitable military military squashing of any sort of protest, be it on the left or the right, come November?
I don't like to use the word inevitable, but it is a logical conclusion given the facts of the case, and one would be wise to prepare for such a possibility.
How do you prepare for that?
I am building custom trauma kits, street medic style. You know what I mean? Because that's what I can do. And if you can do a thing, if you know how to do a thing, a specialized thing, prepare for that thing. is what I'm saying. So if you have advanced first aid training or medic skills, prepare for that. Get a bag designed for trauma and for tear gas. That is a thing you can do. It's a thing I'm doing.
And I guess, well, it just seems like that preparation that you're describing is not just being done by the Department of Defense. It's also being done by people in the streets right now. And his experience in the Black Lives Matter protests, I think, has prepared a lot of people and has shown us how far we need to go in terms of organization. And I mean, but ultimately, this is what I've been saying all along, is that there's nothing that we can do against if the military actually decides to use its full, like anything close to its full might, or even half or a quarter. Like there's nothing that any protesters are going to be able to do. Not even the fucking right-wing protest that has AK-47s. They're not going to be able to take on the military.
That's right.
So there's kind of just like, it just seems like the only option that we have is to like, I don't know, like to assume that what are the options? To just cross our fingers and hope that the military doesn't fucking kill us, or to hold up mirrors at them so they can see, like, I don't know, like I'm not really sure what to do with that information about like the surveillance thing. It's like, I don't like, so they're surveilling us. It's and insurrection is impossible.
That's not true, Sam. We've seen uprisings. I mean, I think it's like what we're seeing right now that it's interesting and worth talking about is the nature of the counterinsurgency. We're seeing more and more extreme right-wing groups showing up at protests and showing up and bring violence. We saw someone get shot in New Mexico
someone got shot yesterday and killed.
Last night we got someone got shot and killed in Louisville, Kentucky. Right? We're seeing cops and the right wing work together in Philly and elsewhere to protect right wing monuments. So what do you do against there's like different ways to engage different types of people, right? Like if they have tanks, you have to use ammonia and bleach. If it's just a bunch of fucking Proud Boys with baseball bats and garbage can shields, like that can be dealt with too. You just there's different, there's people have been resisting different types of repression in different places for a long time, and there's lots of different lessons to learn. I think it's important to understand, though, that there's certainly been a ratcheting up of right-wing response to these protests, and it's getting ugly and scary.
Yes, and to be clear, what I'm saying is not tactical, okay? It is psychological. So the practicalities of that are beyond me. That's not something I know about. I don't understand how protests are organized, but I do know how to conduct first aid under pressure. So that's all I have from a functional point of view. But I believe pretty strongly that if there are massive protests post-election in November, and it is a fact that we're just going to go out there and get mowed down, then you should still go. It's a time where I think about the Hagakure and what it says. Even if you are facing 10,000 men, you must stand there and be determined to cut them all down, and you will finish the greater part of it. Now, that's not a tactical lesson. That's a psychological lesson.
That's an ancient samurai code that is beautiful and fun to think about, but not applicable to our lives. And people, you might be doing that, Roger, but the people on your left and right are not going to be fucking doing that. For the most part, people don't want to fucking die for this shit. We want a better world, but we don't want to get mowed down for it. We don't want to fucking stand up. Like, the Hagakure also says if your head gets chopped off, you should be prepared to charge one more time into battle. Like, I don't know what to do with that lesson, because
the lesson is to show up. That's all. It's not.
Yeah,
I understand the problems. We've talked about this before with samurai lessons and the Hagakure. But what is the implied message there? You're facing a problem that seemingly insoluble, and it's definitely insoluble if you just stay home, right? So I'm not advocating for like go out there and get murked by the army. That's, again, the Hagakure has no tactical knowledge. It is not a book about conducting anything in the real world. It is a series of kind of psychological puzzles. And that's, I want to be very clear on that. And our discussions of Zen Buddhism and the way it rallies people to do stupid things in the past is totally valid. What I'm saying is that this problem, and you're outlining all these very real problems that I don't know the answer to, but I know that those problems are not going to go away if we just stay at home. That's all I'm saying.
fair enough.
I would just like to add to that, tactically, if the Nazis have bats and shields and you drop 2 levels and grab the shield and twist, are you onto something?
You need to twist the shield to the outside because it's connected to their arm, Max. You gotta move them using the shield. It's connected to them. It's not going anywhere. That's what I'm talking about.
All I'm saying, Roger, is that you might actually have more tactical knowledge than just emergency medicine to offer people. But it's important that you actually train. You can't just go and show up and make a plan in the moment, because everyone's got a plan until a fucking cop punches them in the goddamn face.
That was a nice remixing of the words of the great philosopher Mike Tyson, and I appreciate that. You are correct.
This has been really fun, and I am going to exercise the ultimate authority that I have of shutting it down now.
Awesome.
Thanks, Roger. That was great.
Thanks, guys. You guys are awesome.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much,
you guys.
Roger.